You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskins, your host. As always, this week we are talking a topic we've never spoken about before. We're talking with one of my really good mates, Evan Cunningham-Dunlop. He's the CEO and founder of one of my favourite online resources for property these days, the Property Tribune. You may not have heard of it, you may have, I hope you have, but we've got him in today to chat. So Evan, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks, Trent. Great to be here.
When did it start? What's the point of the Property Tribune? Obviously the name gives it away, but where's Property Tribune going to be in a year, 5 years from now, and what's happening right now?
Yeah, so I started the Property Tribune in the middle of a lockdown in Perth back in February of 2021. So we launched on February 1st, 2021.
So it's just over a year old.
Yeah, and so we're currently doing about 20,000 visitors a month are coming to the Property Tribune, which is pretty exciting to be already at that level after only been going for that period of time.
It is.
We're already doing about 100 articles a week in terms of publishing as well.
That's a lot of content, man.
Huge amount of content.
What are you talking about on a weekly basis to get 100 articles a week out?
So we're very focused on financial property news. So we started with a bit of a broader sort of remit, I guess, in terms of where we were covering property topics, but we've gone really deep into the finance aspects.
So you're smashing out 100 articles a week. That means that every day we're looking on this. I press refresh, there's probably a new article coming up. Right now, I'm looking at what's happening in Ukraine and how that's going to affect the market. MaxCap grows $80 million fund for a brewery. Fernvale Village Shopping Centre sells $35 million of assets. $180 million Melbourne hotel, triple net leased. Rest Sydney development site for sale. There's so much variability here. Industrial rents continue inflating. Tim Gurner's gone and bought another site for a $300 million development. That's just one a week for that fella, it seems. There's so many pieces of information coming out here. Have you got any ideas as to what people are clicking on the most? What are people reading the most? What are people most interested in?
So interestingly, we cover a pretty broad array of different types of articles.
Yes, you do. Everything, right?
Everything, right? And so the level of interest that people have is actually pretty broad-based as well. So the audience is very much an investor audience, but the types of articles that they're reading are geared towards those individuals. And I think that's one of the things that allows us to provide value. We're not just a one-size-fits-all approach. We have information that people need to access for the types of information that they're specifically interested in. A lot of people are clicking on articles about the latest developments that are coming up. A lot of people are clicking on articles about the latest commercial real estate transactions. Really, it depends upon the individual and the type of news that is interesting for them.
I guess that's the point, right? It's a broad church of all different types of people, either looking for a quick stat, in and out, really quick bounce rate, or people who are reading an article for 15 minutes, listening and learning about Nathan Blackburn's life, for example, right? That's the point, isn't it? It's for everyone. If you wanted to look up any piece of information, what I've found is that so many of the good articles on the other websites, they're behind a paywall. A lot of the time you can get most of that information from the Property Tribune anyway.
Yeah, so we don't have a paywall,
Yeah.
And that's a core aspect of how we want to operate. We really want to be able to provide that information for people for free, for them to access, because we do want to be able to educate people. That's the core tenet of why we exist. I think one of the things that we also allow people to do is not just read a specific article, but read all of the articles that are related to a specific company or a specific entity or a specific association of some type.
And find that easily. It's really hard to do that on other websites. You have to use tags and stuff like that. And most people don't understand that. But here, it's so easy. You can go, oh yeah, bang, there's the other 8 articles from this company.
Right, exactly. You can just click on the link that goes through to that company, or you can do a quick search. It's very accessible.
You've got a subscribe button on the website, and I hate subscriptions because they just don't leave me alone. If someone was to subscribe to the Property Tribune, how would we interact with that? Are we going to get bombarded 100 times a week with a new article, or is there ways for us to be able to tailor what we want to read?
So we have a daily wrap at the moment, and basically it's just one email a day that comes out with the specific content that's been published over that last period of time, like the top 7 articles from that day. If you wanted to unsubscribe, super easy. You click unsubscribe. There's no spamming or anything that goes on in the back of that. It's really, I guess, our way of allowing people to have something that surfaces to them the news that they're interested in.
For everyone listening out there, how would it compare to, say, receiving articles that you might read on Domain or realestate.com or the Urban Developer or Real Estate Conversation? We've all read those places before, but how is the Property Tribune different?
One of the things that's different about realestate.com.au and Domain, for example, is they cover a lot of content which is related to buyers or owner-occupiers. It's a lot of lifestyle content. It tends to be, a lot of volume, but not necessarily always deep when it comes to their content around property funds, for example, or property investment opportunities.
A lot of the time they'll just feature, if you look on Facebook, they'll feature a really sexy house in Melbourne, and that will be the article, for example, or it will be like an update on some quarterly data that they've received and those sort of things. But you guys take it to an even deeper level from my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Like ours is very much around helping people understand how they can make the right sort of investment decisions when it comes to property. So we want to demystify property investment on a level that goes much deeper than just, here's a cool house, do you want to buy it?
Yeah, or Perth's property market went up 5% this quarter. I mean, you guys, I'm sure, report on that anyway. But the articles that I read on the propertytribune.com.au, they're certainly talking about more specific developments nationally, not just in Perth. And it's great to say that this is a WA-founded business, by the way. WA-founded online newspaper, I guess. If it was 15 years ago, it probably would have been hard print, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, we actually thought about doing a hard print copy a little bit, just for something as a sort of adjunct to what we had already.
Because business news do a hard print.
They do a hard print thing as well. But for us, like one of our, I guess, skill sets is really being able to build something in the online space. We have a lot of capability on that front, so it makes sense to be online. And yeah, from a news perspective, for example, we cover a lot of content about what property funds are doing and how investors can make investments at different levels of the capital stack. So we go deeper than just, here's a cool place, you should buy it, or here's an interesting thing that's happening in the market on a broad-based sort of basis. It's more around, here's what the return is from either this particular property fund or how this particular development went, and where those opportunities are trending going forward.
Give us an example.
A good example would be an article we did with John Vickers and Marius Grobela from Ingwe.
They're a WA-based company?
They're a WA-based company, yep. They did a big development in Como called Paradiso, which sold out. I think they had 51 apartments that they
they recently sold that out only a couple of months ago, right?
They did, yeah. So I think that was over a 3-year period from inception through to selling everything, so it did very well for them. But the article that we have done with the interview is really diving into what that journey was like for investors. So we looked at their view and their take on the return on equity that the initial preferred equity holders had with that development, and the subsequent equity holders, and also what the senior debt returns as well. So from the article, it was talking about that the equity holders had above a 60% return on investment over that 3-year period, and senior debt holders had an 8% return on investment per annum. So a lot of people don't get exposed to what that sort of journey can look like for an investor.
It can be a really tightly held secret how it all works. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors in the property industry about, where do you get your money from, your investment from, what are you paying, what do you make? Some people obviously don't like to talk about their wins, and then when those that lose, they certainly don't want to talk about that either.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's really hard for mum and dads especially who are interested in trying to pick it up to the next level, ever really be able to know how to knock on the door and even whose door to knock on to get information that you've now made available on the Property Tribune. People call me, email me all the time saying, hey Trent, love the podcast, but are there other pieces of information? You only do it once a week. Where else can I get my info on, that insider knowledge, right?
Right.
This is the place. This is why I've got you on, because I really think you're onto something here.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess if we look at my journey was as an investor, like the first thing that I did as an investor was I went out and I bought residential property, and I bought that in an outer suburb and I put a tenant in it. And then I dealt with many years of having tenant issues.
Yeah. How's it going these days?
It's better than what it was. It's been okay over the long term, but it's also taken a lot of time, really, as an individual as well. And I run a couple of companies. So at the same time as running these companies, I'm also managing a couple of investment properties. I have a property manager and, they do a great job. But nevertheless, if you get a bad tenant and that tenant trashes that house, and that can kind of take a dark sort of turn. So for me, when I started investing in property, I didn't understand or have access to the sort of information that I needed to be able to make investment decisions beyond the typical sort of Australian property investor journey.
Your parent says, hey, you should probably buy a property, and then you think, I'm not going to buy one for myself, but I'll get an investment property, and that's nearly the level of information you had at the time, right?
Pretty much, yeah. So my cousin was doing it as well, like quite a bit. And, I was reading some magazines that were very much around that particular type of journey, looking at various types of, the Residex report, which covers things around like best yield and best capital growth projected going forward and that sort of stuff. And that was really how I, based a lot of my investment decisions. I had actually no idea, what is mezzanine finance, for example, at that stage, and, what sort of opportunities might be available to an investor on that level.
Is this online newspaper tilted more towards your sophisticated investors who are throwing in hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars into developments, or maybe interested in doing so? Is it also something that mum and dads that are just starting the journey could see benefit from?
Definitely. One of our core audiences is the sophisticated investor side of the market. There's quite a high number of sophisticated investors in Australia.
Well, it's obvious because the stuff you write to is very much quite sophisticated.
Yeah. So we really try to be deep and specific in terms of the content. It's not fluff. We go into the crux of what does make a good investment or what makes a bad investment as well. I guess the other aspect is as well is a lot of investors in Australia that are aspirational. So they're not content with just investing in small things on the side. They really do want to become sophisticated. So
they need to know where they're going eventually. They may not be able to afford now to be a part of anything that you might be reporting on, but at least they know what that looks like one day.
That's right, yeah. And if we look at the various types of investment opportunities that are available, so there are some investment opportunities that are just for sophisticated or wholesale investors, which basically means that you need to have, I think it's earning more than $250,000 per year or have a net worth of more than $2.5 million.
Or investing $500,000 into a project.
Correct, right. Yep. Those ones sometimes can be closed off, but then there's other ones that also can have close to the same sort of opportunity, but they might be available to retail investors. The thing about those retail investment opportunities is sometimes they can actually also be really bad as well. So having the ability to be able to decipher what makes a good retail investment versus a bad retail investment and being able to understand the fundamentals that impact that decision is a really important component for an investor's journey, on their path to not just staying in sort of, their current income bracket, but wanting to grow that income bracket and become a sophisticated investor themselves.
It's all well and good having all the reporting, I guess, on what's happening in the market right now. But another cool thing you guys are doing, and you've started it recently, but you've got some pretty big hitters already in this space, is you've started interviewing some pretty notable people. Nathan Blackburn, John Fung from Domain, Neville Potsy, you just put on there from Rewa. There's some guys with a lot of experience there.
Yeah, thank you. Those guys, are really great people for us to be able to interview on the Tribune. It's
we might have to get them on here in the podcast, I reckon.
Well, I'm sure they'd want to come. You have a great podcast, friend. So
thank you.
I'm sure they'd want to be here. One of the things that I found really interesting about the articles that like Nathan Blackburn and John Fung did in particular is they spoke a lot about the influence that their family had on their property investment journey, which is an interesting one when we tie it back to what we're talking about, with what we're doing with the Property Tribune. Really, one of the reasons that they were able to be successful is because they had family members that also helped them on their journey. So,
are we talking about financial handouts here or other means?
No, just education and understanding of how things sit. So, obviously Nathan Blackburn had his dad, John, who was, big in the property industry. And John Fung also had his parents who encouraged him to make his first investments at a really young age. I think the first property he bought was for $60,000. If he hadn't had that guiding hand, then, perhaps he would have taken a different journey in life. So I think, it's really interesting to see this influence that family can have and the ability to access that sort of information from trusted advisors can have it on an investor's journey.
The reason I like the articles is they're quite long for starters. There's multi-part articles and you don't have to do a forensic investigation into Nathan Blackburn's history, for example. If you want to know how the hell that fella got to being so successful in what he does at Cedar Woods these days and what Cedar Woods are doing and how they're doing it and that journey over the last 20-something years, the article sort of speaks to it quite clearly as to where he started and how that progressed and the challenges he had as well. So I would say hats off to that. The more people you can interview at that level, which is what we love to do here as well, and provide just stories, because for a lot of young people or a lot of people at the start of their financial journey, they have aspirations, but it's like jumping over a river with your blindfold on. You know that the river's only certain width. You know that there is a way to get across, but you don't know where to step, where those stepping stones are. And until you've done them and you don't fall in the river, luckily, you're really not sure how that worked out. The way that we do get some idea to peep through that blindfold is to read stories about people who are a few steps ahead of you.
I think one of the big aspects of stories, and I think you're really on the money with that, stories are critical to understanding how someone can do something, is to understand the story of when it goes well, but also to understand the war stories as well.
Yeah.
Like I do a lot of work in the startup space as well, and that's some of my favorite information to be able to uncover is, when did something go south for someone? How did they become a cropper, and how can someone else avoid making that same sort of mistake in the future?
Especially for people from WA the last 5-6 years, a lot of people have between 2016 and 2020 for a lot of people, and especially the bigger companies that had lots of staff, big expectations. It was a treading water period for a lot of businesses in that time frame. So to hear about how they got through that, I think gives a lot of context for those people who might be struggling themselves. Not only do you guys act as a news house in that space, an interview house, but also you're starting to list for developers, development sales. What's the play there? What are you trying to achieve? Is it a service to the developers where you're advertising that way, or is it a service also to the readership?
Both. So one of the things about the development side of things is that with my other hat that I wear, I'm also a CEO of a digital marketing agency called Living Online. We do a lot of marketing in the property development space. So we have access to and already work with a lot of developers. One of the things that I think is important from the way that developments work is that often when you're looking at a property investment opportunity, often those property investment opportunities are based around developments, and you've got particular ways that people can invest in those developments. The property funds are often obviously tied directly into the way that those developments are actually financed. So we wanted to close the circle between the understanding of where is this development coming from? How is it being financed? What does that opportunity look like? Who is a developer? What are they selling? What are those apartments, for example, or townhouses, or commercial, industrial, whatever it is? What do those opportunities look like from a sales but also an investment perspective, and really kind of pull those two things together? So we're really kind of, I guess, creating a singular ecosystem where people can not just look at what they can invest in, but also can potentially look at what they can buy as well.
Now, you're not a property expert. You are an online marketing expert, a digital agency expert. You're bringing your skills to property. But through the Tribune, given it is a national news house now, given that your readership is very much spread nationally, it reflects probably the population in terms of your percentages, I understand. What insights do you have as the guy who runs this thing, who sees all the data points, who sees where the conversations are going and coming from? How have things been moving over the last 12 months of what's being reported here versus the East Coast and the mood?
I think one of the key things is actually probably quite aligned to what you often talk about, Trent, which is that there's no singular property market. So if we look at Australia as a whole, that market is a very big country, but we've actually got a lot of microcosms in terms of the individual markets within there. So I've noticed definitely that look at the national publications, they're often talking about there being a property market downturn, but that's really very East Coast centric. Whereas in Perth, we're still very much having an upswing from everything that I'm seeing, and potentially a larger upswing over the coming months as well. So I think, one of the key aspects is that the way that news is reported is often quite homogenous.
I find it can be lazy as well.
It's very lazy, yeah.
People from the East Coast nearly just don't even bother or care that there is a readership in the West Coast, so they just say it's national even though we don't have the same story.
And the same thing applies to how you look at it from not just a state basis, but also down to an individual suburb basis as well. Within the Perth property market, we've got certain suburbs that are performing very well and others that are not performing well. By the same token, we also have developments that are performing very well and developments that are not performing well. So I think one of the key understandings that people can get from reading something like the Property Tribune is to get a feel for where does the market sit, not on a holistic kind of all-encompassing basis, but where does the market sit either in the area that's hyper-relevant or hyper-local, or with a particular development, or with a particular provider who's offering an investment opportunity as well. All of those things are very different.
When I read your articles, it's pretty obvious to see that there's still a lot of money in the East Coast. All the articles you talk that you've got here that talk to projects getting up, projects getting financed, how they got financed, projects being completed, partnerships being created. A lot of that's still East Coast, and it's big numbers that if you put any of those in Perth, you go, that's a mega project. What's it going to take to get that money here?
I think it's going to happen to some extent a little bit naturally over the coming months. I think, we're definitely going to have an upswing as the border opens again, and, as we see people having migration back into Western Australia. I think one of the things is that often success breeds the idea of follow-on success. So if something has done well, then people think, well, that worked, so then it can work for me as well. So I think, part of it's got to be an organic sort of evolution, and you can't kind of really, push something if people are just unwilling to do it. But Perth is an area for opportunity. It's a tremendously untapped area relative to a lot of the eastern states areas. We've got a great environment. We have, tremendous work opportunities. We have a very low relative median house price, for example. Commercial real estate, which has been unloved, during the pandemic for a significant period of time. We have inflation taking off. We have, the market really roaring to life when it comes to the economy in Western Australia. So there's a tremendous opportunity, in my personal opinion, for property investment within Western Australia. And we're also seeing some larger scale developments, both residential and commercial, taking off in the state as well. I think the first build to rent development in the whole of Australia was in Western Australia.
Yeah, Sentinel pushing that through in Subiaco. There's a few coming, and that's a perfect example of where it's massive institutional money required with regards to the yields for that. You don't do a build to rent unless you've got pretty much superannuation based levels of money. I'm alluding to really, there's a section on the Property Tribune that really, to me, it looks like an old Yellow Pages in a way. It's a bit of a registry of all the companies that you guys work with. These are the property developers. These are the financiers. Is the point here to be able to get people together and start talking and go, oh, these guys, I can give them a call. These are the articles that we've spoken to about. I can read up about them, I can learn about them, and I can maybe get in contact?
Exactly. Yeah. So, one of the things I think, within the property development industry is that you have people that have been doing it for a long time. And then you have people, in the same way that you have aspirational property investors, you've also got aspirational property developers, for example, as well. But not necessarily everyone has the same level of understanding of who are the best private non-bank lenders, for example, who are the best construction companies to use for particular types of construction projects. So we're wanting to create very much an industry portal that allows readers to be able to understand who were the developers, who were the construction companies, who were the lenders,
who was the architect,
who was the designer,
who was the planning company,
correct,
all this.
Exactly, on each particular development. So providing readers with the ability to access that information, I think, will just level up the ability for people to lean into quality.
Mate, I really appreciate the chat. It's definitely something where, as most people will know, I don't like to spruik or sell anything on this podcast. Is all about information. The reason I wanted to get you in today is because, as I said, so many people ask me, where can I get more information? Well, for everyone listening, this is where you get it, guys. You don't have to pay for it. It comes out 100 times a week on average. Nearly everything you're going to want to know will probably be on here. So the propertytribune.com.au, you can search everything. You can go private investigative research into companies that you've heard of and want to know what they're up to. It's all there, and it will keep growing, I'm sure. And given the fact it's only a year old and it's already got so much information, I'd imagine what it will be in 5 years. Congratulations, Ev. Well done on it. Keep going. Don't give up. It's obviously doing so well already, and it will be, for it to become an institution in property information over the next few years, which is where it's going already, I think will be a big boon, especially to our listeners in WA, but also nationally these days.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate being on the podcast. You just do such a tremendous job with what you do here. And if we can add a little bit to that ecosystem, then that's something that we'd love to be able to do.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!